Hey friends, I hope things are good with you. I've been reading Zappa by Barry Miles. It's a Frank Zappa biography. It's really good and really fun. And on page 306, there's one small paragraph that talks about how Bob Dylan asked Frank Zappa to produce an album that became Infidels. I thought that's interesting. So I decided to look into it more. It says in the book here that it fell apart because of money, which everything falls apart because of money. But I decided to look into it. There's a lot of interviews out there from Zappa where he talks about it. He said that he would get a lot of strange phone calls, and this is, I think, back in 1981 or 82. He said he gets a lot of strange phone calls at the house back then. Just weirdos, which you can imagine the people calling Frank Zappa. And someone calls up and says, "Hey, I'm Bob Dylan, and I want you to play you some songs." And he's kind of like, "Okay, come by the studio." And somebody shows up, and he has a video camera on the front door. And Zappa says he doesn't know anything about what's happening in the popular world, so he hadn't seen a picture of Dylan in a long time and didn't know what he looked like these days. But he's looking. He said it's real cold out, and he's got a shirt opened up, just a shirt, no jacket or anything, standing out there. And he's like, "I don't know. It might be Bob Dylan. It might be." So he's looking, and he sends the engineer out to go see who it is. They bring him in, and it's Bob Dylan. And he says he would like to play him some songs and was curious about him producing his next record, which would become Infidels. And they walk in, they sat down at the piano, and he played, I believe, 11 songs. And Frank liked them and said he was a nice guy. Said he got along with him. They made some kind of a crack. Frank said, Zappa said to Dylan, as Dylan was just coming out of his, or had been making his Christian albums, his Born Again albums, and Frank had been debating a bunch of right-wing conservative Christians on television a lot. He was in his heart, he's becoming even more known as an atheist. So he asked Bob, "You're not going to talk about the Big J, are you?" And Bob's like, "No, there's no Jesus songs in this." And he's like, "All right." And then there's some kind of a crack that when they're upstairs, he's making Bob some food, and Zappa has a dog, and he makes a joke, "Be careful around him, my dog doesn't like Christians." And he said Dylan didn't laugh, and maybe it just wasn't funny. Zappa trying to be funny with a sense of humor. I didn't see anywhere where they said it fell apart because of money. Everything I saw said it fell apart because of scheduling. It just didn't happen. Mark Pinsky was the engineer that night, and he did an interview in 2003 with Mix Magazine where he talked about this. He says, Bob Dylan decided he wanted to come up and see us at the studio. Frank and Bob had never met, so he came to the bottom of the door, which is at the bottom of the stairs. He had to step down the hill. He was on the monitor, and I remember Frank, it was just me and Frank in the control room, and he said, "Man, that's not Dylan. Is that Dylan?" And I said, "Yeah, that's Dylan." And I went down to let Bob up, and he drove himself there. He had just I think he was going through one of those periods where he had just fired his managers, and he was kind of going through a rebirth period there. And he came up to the studio, and the first thing Frank said to him was, "Well now, Bob, I just want to tell you, I'm 180 degrees away from this religious shit," or religious stuff, he said. Bob looked at him and said, "Well, gee, Frank, I think you've been reading too many of their magazines. And I realized you got two legends there that were meeting each other for the first time, that never knew each other, and all they knew was about what they had read about each other. So it was kind of a strange thing." That's an interesting point when huge personalities like Zappa and Dylan meet for the first time, and all they know is what's written in the papers. Goes on, Pinsky says, "The reason I wanted to bring that one particular incident up to you was as soon as they started talking, of course, everything was fine. There was no problem. We sat down, all three of us were sitting in there talking, and Dylan was ready to look for another engineer. Well, Dylan asked Frank, "What kind of engineer is this here Pinsky guy?" And Frank said, "Markman," and Markman was my nickname he gave me. He said, "Markman can get you a better drum sound in 20 minutes than any engineer you've ever seen." It wasn't but about 10 minutes later where Frank and Bob Dylan went out into the studio, and they're plinking around on the piano, both of them, just plinking around. And I heated up a microphone, and I actually put it on cassette, by the way. Tommy Mars has this cassette of Frank and Dylan just writing some stuff together, just plinking around and writing some stuff together. This went on for like a couple hours. I just ran this. I heated up the microphone over the piano, and those guys were talking and playing and doing all this little tinkering around. And I'm looking through the glass just thinking, Jesus, how lucky I was to be there, watching basically two legends who kind of never knew each other, but it didn't matter. What makes these guys famous in the first place is their unique talent that they had and their ability to just write and create. So you got two guys from two opposite ends of the spectrum, and here they are sitting out there playing, creating something together, and having a good old time. To me, it was like an amazing revelation. I obviously felt very privileged, and I always felt very privileged the whole time I worked with Frank. I really did. He made you feel that way. But that cassette actually still exists somewhere. Tommy Mars still has the damn thing, I think. And it would be pretty interesting to listen to it because Tommy was my roommate at the time. I brought it home, and I just wanted to throw that in. Is Tommy out there? I found a later article that said that that cassette was lost, and we don't know where that's at. That's amazing that there's a recording of Dylan and Zappa just goofing around on some songs and having conversation in between it. And I don't know. I'd like to hear what Zappa would have done with Infidels. There were other people. Dylan must have really been looking for something and wasn't sure, was in a transitional phase of his life. He asked Elvis Costello to record that album, produce that album, and that was right about the time Elvis Costello produced that Squeeze album that brought us Tempted. He produced that, and man, the idea of making Infidels sound something like that, I'm all for that. I think that album sounds great. I'm not a big, he ended up getting Mark Knopfler to produce it, and I love Mark Knopfler. I love that period of Dire Straits, but I don't really like the way Infidels sounds. It doesn't, there's just a lot to it that I don't dig that much. Maybe you love it, and that's great. But I just am never been that into the sound of that record. My personal choice. I don't like the sound of 80s records for the most part. There's exceptions, but not many. But Dylan also asked David Bowie to produce that album. And there's a lot of talk out there about how Dylan really didn't like David Bowie. And he's publicly would talk about how terrible a song he thought The Young Americans was. And I like that song myself. And I love the break down and cry, the falsetto part. But I thought that was interesting, so I dug around a little bit. And I found this Playboy interview from 1976. This would have been before Dylan supposedly talked to Bowie about producing that record. But this is Bowie talking about Dylan. This is 1976 Playboy interview. The Playboy says, "You're not noted for cordial relationships with other artists, yet there was the rumor that you flew to Europe to spend a sabbatical with Bob Dylan. What about it?" Bowie says, "That's a beaut. I haven't even left this bloody country in years. I saw Dylan in New York 7 or 8 months ago. We don't have a lot to talk about. We're not great friends. Actually, I think he hates me." Playboy says, "Under what circumstance did you meet?" And Bowie says, very bad ones. We went back to somebody's house after some gig at a club. We had all gone to see someone, I can't remember who, and Dylan was there. I was in a very sort of verbose frame of mind, and I just talked at him for hours and hours and hours. And whether I amused him or scared him or repulsed him, I really don't know. I didn't wait for answers. I just went on and on about everything, and then I said goodnight. He never phoned me. And Playboy says, did he impress you? Bowie says, not really. I just like to know what the young chap thought of me. I was quite convinced that what I had to say was important, which I seem to feel all the time. It's been quite a while since someone really impressed me. I thought that was pretty interesting. You can imagine, and Bowie loved Dylan's music, strongly influenced by it. He really thought Dylan's music was great. And you can put yourself in Bowie's shoes of meeting someone that you hold in high esteem. Maybe there were substances involved. You just talk that person's ear off all night, and then that person does everything they can to avoid you. But I guess a few years later, Dylan asked him to produce an album, and it didn't happen. But I don't know. What do you think about Infidels? Who would you rather have produce Infidels? Mark Knopfler, Elvis Costello, Frank Zappa, or David Bowie? I'm going to go with Elvis Costello just because attempted. I want to hear a Dylan album sounding like that in 1982. That would have been good. I want to hear Joker Man like that. But that's my choice. I want to say, while we're talking about Dylan a little bit, you guys know how much I love Dylan's music, and I have for quite a while. When I was probably 19, maybe up to 22 or somewhere in there, like Dylan was my favorite by far. Was going, just listening to him all the time and going deep into the albums, and I really loved Dylan's music. But none of my friends liked Dylan. I think none of them. And most of them would make fun of me for liking Dylan. And so I wanted to, that's artistically where I could relate to and wanted to go to. Like the music that I loved most, I just kind of kept to myself. You know, Dylan, the Byrds, Merle Haggard, stuff like that. You know, Willie. There's all that side of stuff that I really dug, like discovering Townes Van Zandt. I loved that stuff. Tom Waits, Utah Phillips. But I just couldn't talk about it with my friends because they thought that stuff was terrible. So I'd play music with them and we'd play like what they liked. And I liked playing music with friends. So kind of go along with it. But man, I'm sympathetic when I hear people not relating, like feeling like they need to live a more authentic life. Like they feel like there's some version of themselves that they're not doing a good job of expressing publicly, and maybe that their friends or their family don't understand or something like that. So I'm sympathetic to that, because this music was a small version of that for me. It didn't change how I felt. It's hard to put all of this into words, and I never really talked about it publicly or whatever. But the part that I want you guys to take, especially if there's younger people watching this, but anybody, you know, it's okay to be who you think, you know, who you want to be. And life, our entire lives are this wheel, you know, that keeps turning, and you know, the long arc of history. Make sure it bends towards who you really are and get closer to the source of whoever you are. The best version of yourself. And that's kind of what I did. Somewhere in my early 20s, I was like, screw it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be, you know, this is what I like. This is the kind of music I'm going to play. I want to lead a creative life. And it just so happened that most of those people that I was friends with them, I just didn't see them anymore. And I met new friends and got way closer, you know, to people. It's a complicated thing that I'm probably doing a awkward job of talking about, but I think I talked about this on a previous show a couple years ago. But a lot of you are new and you haven't watched those old videos. So I actually met Amy, my partner, my gal. We've been together for 24 years. I met her at a Bob Dylan concert, and it would have been really easy for me to not go. I didn't want to go that night. And there's a story behind that, but I sometimes think of the decisions I've made in my lifetime that were just kind of split-second decisions and how good things came from it. And it would have been really easy for me to not make that decision, like playing guitar. It would have been really easy for me to never start playing guitar. It was hard to start playing, and I put a lot of effort into making it happen. But my life has been so much better because I did that basic thing, just learned how to play guitar, and it started me down this road, a really, really good road, I think. But I had seen Dylan at the Mirage in Indianapolis sometime in the early 90s. I don't remember when. And it was just really bad. I mean, it was really bad. And it was kind of a bummer. I didn't want to see Dylan, this person who I really, really dug, just not be very good. And I don't know what was the deal, but the evening just really kind of sucked. And I almost left. And I thought, how impossible is this that I was thinking about leaving a Bob Dylan show when I love his music so much. And when it was over, I just sat and thought, I don't think I want to go see Dylan anymore because I don't want to think of him like that. I have the albums, and they bring a lot of joy to my life. I don't need to go see him live and feel that way. So I didn't make any effort to go see him live. And my buddy Todd Fox somehow got free tickets. Bob Dylan came to Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, and Joni Mitchell was opening. And Todd got free tickets and called me up. Hey, I got tickets to see Dylan. I think it was like tonight. You want to go? And I'm kind of thinking, I don't go see Dylan because, that one bad concert. And he's like, come on, man, it'll be fun. And I'm like, all right, man. So we go see Dylan at MSA. Joni Mitchell was really good, and Bob was really good. I mean, he was great. He was into it. I thought his set list was great. I don't know, it was everything that you'd want a Bob Dylan concert to be in 2000, whenever. And, I guess it was still the 90s, wasn't it? I'm bad with the years. That would have been late 90s. And it was great. But during the intermission, after Joni Mitchell had played, like, let's go stretch your legs and walk around the outer concourse while we wait for Bob to come on. So we're walking around the outer concourse, and I see someone I know that walks up and says hi to me. And I'm like, hey, I'm thinking, who's the good-looking gal who's hanging out with him and his wife? And introduce us, and it's Amy. And that's cool. We talked just a second, and then I guess she thought I was interesting and neat, and she tried to do whatever she could to be in the same place I would be over the next month or so. And we ended up meeting up and enjoying each other's company. We're still hanging out. So it would have been very easy for me not to go to that Dylan concert. But since I did, I've met this person who I've spent 24 years of my life with, that I love dearly, and I'll spend the rest of my life with. And just those little bitty moments when you make a decision and like something really big comes for you, the whole course of your life changes. I don't think I ever would have moved to Nashville if I didn't meet Amy. She's the sort of person that'll like, no, you need to do that. Let's go do that. She's so many good things came from that. And I also sometimes think of, I'm getting way off subject, I apologize, but I sometimes think of the decisions people make split-second decisions that affect their life in a negative way. Like your friends, you get in the car with your friends and find out they're going to knock off a liquor store, and now you're right in the middle of it, and you end up in prison for a long stretch, or thinking, I'm going to do this desperate thing, and you do a really bad thing out of desperation or whatever, but you make that split-second decision that was a bad one. I feel for people. I don't know. I mean, there's consequences to what we do, don't get me wrong. But those little bitty decisions we make in our lives hold a lot of weight. And we usually don't realize how much weight they hold while we're making them. But I don't know. I got way off subject of Bob Dylan and Frank Zappa. Who would you rather have produce Infidels? Did you even like Infidels? I remember Joker Man. I like some of the songs on there, and it's Dylan. There's always going to be good stuff, but the reverb on there just didn't feel organic to me. Mark Knopfler's great. He plays great. Is Mick Taylor on that album? I think. I don't remember. But anyway, tell me what you think, and I'm going to jump off here, and I'll see you guys down the road, and much love to you.